We are gathered here tonight to discuss a political and philosophical misconception so outrageously stupid, so ridiculous, that I think every one of you in your heart of hearts knows it must be wrong, knows that it must be refutable. And yet, it may be that you lack the vocabulary to talk it through rationally, that you're not confident you'll be able to convince someone from the other side that you are, in fact, the one on the right side. And I find these things that my fellow vegans struggle with very easy to reason through, very easy to talk about, because I devoted my life to the study of politics. And the mistake vegans make is that they think about political issues unpolitically. They think about these things as if they have to do with the laws of nature, as if they have to do with the laws of logic, as if they have to do with the laws of physics, as if they're part of the cosmology of the earth itself, the order of nature in a very ancient sense, right? It's like, no. We're actually talking about political concepts, and we have to engage in this critique in a political way. My sweet, I would like to turn off the light that's over the kitchen stove. I think it's screwing up my lighting game here. Okay. So we get a cameo appearance. Yeah, shout out to Hey Mudan. If you don't know her YouTube channel, she actually does have a new YouTube video today. Some of you guys might not know that. So that's actually a good opportunity to plug Hey Mudan, the YouTube channel. Yeah, I'm going to give them the link. But yeah, she's got a new YouTube video up today. And if you follow me on Patreon, you would already have the link to that. Okay. Yeah, that's about as much effort as I'm willing to make with the lighting. So if you, the last video I made, you could actually see the color of my eyes. In this one, you can't. I have inky black eyes here, but it's a complete illusion. Shout out to James. Shout out to Nacho. Shout out to Cruelty-Free Cosplay has joined us. Just imagine. All right. So yeah, we're getting into a topic that actually he and I discussed from a totally different angle years ago. The last time he appeared on my channel, I forget how many years ago that was, but yeah, these types of issues have come up again and again. So look, there are two ways I can express this, and I can answer any questions from the audience. Some of you may have dealt with this problem in real life or in your internet life. I got a question from a supporter on Patreon, which is the reason for making this video now, who wrote in saying, I could give this guy's name, but I don't know. A supporter on Patreon wrote asking, quote, "Hi, Eisel, could you delve deeper into the transhumanist philosophy of David Pierce on redesigning the global ecosystem so animals don't suffer in the wild? He's one of the first people to introduce this idea in the vegan sphere and has interviews and podcasts with other vegans and YouTubers and has published books going into detail on this, quote unquote, can biotechnology abolish suffering?" So let's just be clear in terms of who my opponents are in this. My opponents are vegans who want to live on a planet where there are no sharks. They feel that we, as human beings, have come up with a philosophy that is so morally superior to sharks that we should eradicate all sharks in the name of our philosophy. All right, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about shark genocide or sharkicide. I'm going to trademark that. Okay, but it goes much further than that. I mean, as absurd as that seems. So again, as I began this video saying, before we had the lighting change, before I called in my technician to fix up the lights here, this is something most of you will just be flabbergasted by, whether you were at a vegan conference, an animal rights conference, or more likely, you're talking to a friend or relative of yours who eats meat. Maybe you're talking to your parents or grandparents, people who are not vegan and who are weirded out by this. They say, well, look, I think you vegans are crazy because I've heard you want to kill all the sharks. What? Gary Yarovsky is among the people to call for this, killing all the sharks, killing all the lions, right, in the name of our morally superior philosophy. Anyway, so I just say, this is the kind of context where you might be confronted with this, and you might just respond by saying, that's crazy. That's self-evidently, monstrously stupid, but you might be lacking the vocabulary, the familiarity of how you're going to talk this through. How would you talk it through with someone who actually believes in it and supports it? How would you talk it through with someone who's your enemy, your opponent, someone who's actually arguing this? Okay, but of course, it's not just genociding all the sharks. It's not just genociding all the lions. As soon as you let yourself think it through coherently, there really ain't that much difference between a shark and a dolphin. There ain't much difference between a shark and a whale. There ain't much difference between a shark and an octopus. In fact, you're talking about eradicating the entire natural world as you know it, because none of it lives up to this human-created ethical value of being vegan or being vegan enough. Now, of course, there's another step into absurdity taken here by people like David Pierce, which is that they are talking about not just destroying the entire natural world, but replacing it with a kind of series of marionettes, a series of cybernetic androids, or a series of what you could call cyborgs. Like, oh, well, we are morally offended by alligators and crocodiles. So it's just a given to these people that they're going to go ahead and eradicate all of the alligators and crocodiles because they're not vegan enough. But then, there would be something lacking in our lives aesthetically, right? I mean, when we look out the window of our cottage in Florida onto the swamp, we'd feel something was missing. So naturally, we would therefore want to replace creatures like alligators and crocodiles and sharks and dolphins with some kind of indescribably horrible human-created marionette, cyborg, robot, or biotechnologically modified animal, right? Like we've created a monster. We've created a vegan shark, a vegan alligator, etc., so that we can still enjoy the appearance of these things without being morally troubled by them, without feeling outraged. So this is the question I received. I'll finish reading the question for the sake of it. He says, quote, "I think you may be able to provide a unique and meaningful critique I haven't already come across. If we can do something about the perpetual and immense suffering nature brings, shouldn't we do so? Question mark. My reply to this in text form was just one word long. Bruh. I could drop the mic right here or just end the video, but let's keep going for another hour, shall we? However much time you guys need. From my perspective, this is actually a simple problem with a relatively simple solution. So look, I am going to talk, as I've presaged at the start of this video, I'm going to talk about politics. I'm going to explain to you that the main problem vegans have in reasoning these things through, talking about them in a way that's coherent and really sane, is that they think about political issues in an unpolitical way, in an almost cosmological way. They think they're talking about the order of nature when they're not. They're talking about politics. But as a preamble here, I'm going to address the implicitly utilitarian aspect of the argument. Now, I've made many videos specifically kind of debunking utilitarianism. I can't remember anyone ever debating or disputing this with me. I did have utilitarians who responded just with kind of mute astonishment, like, how can you possibly not support utilitarianism? People basically got in touch with me and said, oh, but you must believe in utilitarianism, just like Santa Claus. You know what I mean? Utilitarianism is an incredibly easy philosophy to overturn, and it's much more dangerous because people tend, currently in the year 2021, people tend to be unaware of the extent to which it's implicitly folded into other political philosophies, other political, moral, arguments. So I would compare this to the difference between growing up with parents who are communists and growing up with parents who have no particular ideology whatsoever. It doesn't have a name what they believe in, but they drive a Ford 150 truck. They watch ice hockey. They watch American football. They eat hamburgers. They quote the King James Bible. Like, let's say they don't even identify as Christian. They just participate in a whole bunch of flotsam and jetsam from mainstream culture. They have an ideology with no name. Well, if you grow up with parents who are communists, you know what they are, you know what they believe in, you know how they define their own morality and worldview and philosophy and politics. You can grow up, you can analyze what your parents are teaching you, you can come to the conclusion this is wrong, you can reject it, and you can start writing your own philosophy or choosing your own philosophy and start living your own life, right? In a lot of ways, that's easier to do than to look at your parents who don't represent any particular ideology. They have an ideology with no name. They just have a kind of lifestyle, and really pick out what it is that's wrong, what is the limits. You know what? Sitting and watching a baseball game for 4 hours, this is terrible. And it is. It's maybe ruining your life. You know what? my father's excuses for eating yogurt for breakfast don't make sense. Really, I'm sorry. I grew up being taught that yogurt was the healthiest thing you could possibly eat. It's complete nonsense. It doesn't have a name. It's not a clearly enunciated ideology. It's not something you can easily put into its own category to question, cross-examine, challenge, and then come to new conclusions. Whereas if your parents strongly identify with a clear ideology, a clear political, philosophical, or religious kind of theory, then it's easier for you growing up to identify that, challenge it, and debunk it. Or, you may choose to embrace it, but you'll embrace it with some more mature awareness of what it really is, not just what your parents or pastors taught you about it. So in this way, utilitarianism is especially menacing, not as a clearly named ideology unto itself, but the way in which it becomes an unexamined part of the unexamined life. It gets folded into the dough, the leaven of so many other political philosophies in our time. Now, at a very basic, fundamental level, what is it that these people believe in? They believe in minimizing suffering, right? They believe in the most fundamental tenet of utilitarianism, going back to Jeremy Bentham, etc. Okay, I do not believe in minimizing suffering. I've made videos stating this directly. And again, most of the response I get from utilitarians is really just gasping in astonishment. Okay, let me tell you a story. I met a woman who worked as a caretaker for the disabled. And she helped to take care of a man. This was paid for by the government in Canada, by the provincial government, not the federal government. She paid to take care of a man who was both blind and deaf from birth. The only way he could communicate with the outside world, and how he communicated with her when she went to take care of him, was by holding his hand flat, and she could make sign language on his hand. So, normally sign language is done for people who are deaf, but they can see. This guy can't hear and he can't see. And she could communicate with him kind of letter by letter, word by word. Okay. From the day he was born, he was taken care of, bottomless budget, by the government of Canada. He's never had to work any job. He did receive education. That's why it's possible to communicate with him. Someone very patiently got him to be able to communicate in sign language in this limited, slow way. He has basically had a team of servants taking care of him in an institution since the day he was born until the day he dies. He has never experienced any of the psychological anguish I've had in my life. He's never experienced any of the ambition I've had in my life. He's never experienced the passion, the sorrow, the suffering. I've been through terrible sorrow and suffering in my life, unspeakable agony. And the greater your aspirations, the more terrible the disappointments are to live through and so on. Do you think I would have been preferred to be born blind and deaf? And let's be specific, not blind and deaf in Afghanistan. Do you think I would have been preferred to be born and live that man's life? To have a team of servants taking care of me, to never have to cook a meal in my life, to never have to earn money to buy food, to never have to worry about the food I eat. There's just a team of servants taking care of him in a special institute for the profoundly disabled from the day he's born until the day he died. They answer every question. The woman I spoke to, she was this special caregiver who took him on outings. This is all the Canadian government. It's all taxpayers' money. It's a beautiful thing in some ways, but it's completely surreal. She would actually take him out. For example, an outing she told me about was to help him choose the clothes he wanted her to take him to a shopping mall, and he would feel and try on clothes before deciding what clothes to buy. And she would have to describe to him what these clothes are. He's been blind and deaf since birth. This I'm sure, was the highlight of his week. It was probably one of the most interesting things. And he would have to try to visualize in his imagination. I mean, to what extent does he even understand what clothing is or what our society is? I mean, I don't know. I don't know this guy, but obviously his degree of comprehension of the world. If you think the meaning of life is minimizing suffering, okay, you think it's better to be born blind and deaf than it is to see and hear and get out in this world and see and hear all the wonderful things that I've done in my life. Okay, I just say, briefly, so I'm going to get choked up talking about this. I remember the day I set foot on the Themekong River. The first time I got to the banks of the Mekong River, and probably put my hand in it rather than my foot. But, and it's just this indescribable feeling. I couldn't believe I'd lived long enough that I had made it to the Mekong River. It was just something I never thought I would see in my life. And having been through what I've been through in the years before, I really didn't think I would live long enough to see this site. You know what I mean? It's just a river, guys. I mean, the Mekong River, it is just another river, But what does it mean to me? It's connected to this history I've studied. It's connected to this politics. It's connected to the aspirations I had in my life at that time. It's connected to a whole bunch of things I was kind of rebelling against and working for. It was so meaningful for me to just get there and be there and stand on the Mekong River. And by the way, in the months and years that followed, the Mekong River became a completely normal part of my life. I mean, I rode my bicycle along it, if not every day, every week or something. Like of course, it became a banal, everyday fixture in my life. But there was this amazing sense just to see it, just to be there. Now, I'm using this example intentionally. The Mekong River wouldn't have meant anything to me without all of this other suffering that's attached to it. It's like this, but it's specific. It's knowing the history of war. It's knowing about the bomb craters. It's knowing about the unspeakable, history of conflict, the rise and fall of communism, the rise and fall of Theravada Buddhism. There's all this meaning. The water itself is meaningless. It's no different from any other river you could drag your fingers through or dip your toes into. But I'm there. I'm reading about and studying the history of mass murder under the Khmer Rouge. I'm visiting piles of human skulls and all this. This is tremendous. And even just seeing the jungle and anyway, being there, being in that environment. Okay, are you going to tell me that's not worth doing? Are you going to tell me that what's meaningful and what's worthwhile is to minimize suffering, to avoid suffering? And inevitably, we come to the conclusion, as these people are proposing, if you embrace this principle that what life is about is minimizing suffering, well, then why should sharks exist at all? And I am asking you fundamentally, are you and I such worthless sharks? Are you and I so much better or so much worse in our own way than sharks and alligators? Is there no point to the lives of bloodthirsty predators such as you and I, my dear viewer? Or should we really be done away with? And there's no doubt that this same line of reasoning, if you think you can replace the bloodthirsty alligator with some kind of mechanical cyborg vegan alligator, do you think these people would stop short of doing that to human beings? Do you think they would stop short of doing that to your own children or grandchildren? That they should modify human beings to have an anodyne existence, an existence without any suffering, without any fear, without any risk, without exactly these feelings, so that we ourselves also become mere props, mere marionettes, right? You know what I'm saying? So that we also can live in this, in this painting that's been conjured up, lacking, the color black. It's lacking the shades of gray. What would life be without death? Let's be real here, guys. And what would any of this stuff mean without the suffering that surrounds it? And so it's ridiculous. You can ask you the same question. It's interesting, how different it is when you're thinking about yourself and you're thinking about your children. I just told you, I'd rather be able to see and hear, even if it means I have to go work at McDonald's to earn a living, which is entirely plausible. You guys don't know how bad my financial situation is, but it is not for no reason. It is quite plausible that season 3 of à-bas-le-ciel is going to be you guys watching me live stream sitting on the back steps of the McDonald's where I have a day job. I may be going on to doing some very humble work, and I'll love it. I'll still love my life, right, guys? Just saying, I hope you'll be there with me when I'm live streaming from McDonald's or something. I've applied for some really humble jobs. I applied for that terrible job at the airport, terrible job at the hospital. Anyway, whatever. Just, I still, even if the next chapter of my life is working at McDonald's or some other minimum wage job, guys, I'm committed. I would prefer to be able to see and hear and endure all this suffering, plenty of which is psychological in nature rather than directly physical, right? Terrible suffering of being separated from my own daughter, these sorts of things. Not direct physical suffering only. I'm going to stick with this 2 eyes, 2 ears thing that I'm on. Okay. What about if it's your son? What about if it's your daughter? If you had a choice, would you disable, would you cripple your own son or your own daughter so that they would live a life without suffering? Would you choose to have your son or your daughter live in that hospital with a team of servants to take care of their every whim? I know I wouldn't. I want my sons and daughters. I want all of you in the audience. I want all of you. I want you to go out and experience suffering. Okay. I want you to pursue a life that involves and includes meaningful suffering, not meaningless suffering. And then we get into the whole discussion about what is the meaning of life and what does it mean to lead a meaningful life, which I've already done so many videos on, right? Like, I also don't want you to spend your whole life being in video game competitions. The competition to be the greatest video game player, that involves a certain kind of suffering. And, and to me, I've got to say, look, I think that's a lot less meaningful than doing something else with your life and that might involve more suffering. But I think you should embrace the path that's more meaningful and involves more suffering. Okay, so Anon comments, quote, "It's very easy to exalt the meaning extracted from suffering when you have never been shot in a war or burned at the stake and are instead the person symbolically contemplating these things." Well, Anon, I notice, for example, you do not use your real name or your real face. Fascinating. I think this is hinting at the real difference between you and me, Anon. I think you're a coward and I'm not. And I think you haven't read the history of people being burned at the stake, people being shot in the front, and people being shot in the back. I hate to tell you something, it's guys like me who make world history. And it's guys like me who go smiling to their graves and who aren't afraid to get shot and who aren't afraid to be burned at the stake and are even proud of ourselves. Okay? It's the world belongs to people like me. And if you are one of these cowards, whether you're a utilitarian or not, if that's who you are, if that's who you live by, which I'm guessing, because I noticed, why don't you use this is my government name, homie. You can look me up in the phone book. Anyone can come to my doorstep. Okay, homie, I take risks in my life. I'm the same dude who went out to Cambodia and went out to Laos and this stuff. In my small way, in everything I'm doing, even on this YouTube channel right now, yeah, my boldness shows. I'm ready to live and I'm ready to die. But no, man, it's just not the case that everyone's a coward. You may be a coward. You may be afraid to fight and die in war. I signed up to join the army. The only reason I couldn't join the army was that I couldn't give the addresses of all of my brothers and sisters. My father had 9 kids. So I'm just saying, I said, look, I can't fill this out. It's the only reason I didn't go to fight ISIS in the last war. Okay, I literally was disqualified for paperwork reasons. It's ridiculous, but it's true. And by the way, my father doesn't have their address. I couldn't ask my dad, do you know the mailing addresses of all your own children? Because he doesn't, or he's deceased now, but he didn't at the time. But no, I'm sorry. You were talking to someone, and I got bad news for you, Anon. You may not go to Reddit groups where you go with me. The sad fact is, people like me are normal. And if you read the history of any century in any culture, you're going to figure out how normal we are. And that's why human history it has the body count that it has. Put it that way. I was just reading. Sorry, there's a little bit of a digression. I was just reading. I haven't yet finished the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And I mean, that guy's remembered for so many things, but people forget that he was involved in combat himself with no training, with no preparation. He led, I believe, 560 men in arms into combat. And this is not in the Revolutionary War, not in the Civil War. This was fighting against the French, alongside the British. It's an earlier war. He had all kinds of direct experience with people being shot and killed and massacred and burning down villages and this kind of stuff. He lived through all that too. And I mean, he was a publisher. He was I don't know if I can quite call him an intellectual, but he was in the book trade all his life from very early teenage years. He was a printmaker and publisher and whatever, that was the kind of guy he was. But no, I mean, it's not uncommon, that kind of heroism. People rise to the occasion and people are willing to throw themselves into tremendous danger and suffering, including in long centuries where there were no painkillers and there really was no surgery, or surgery was Surgery was more likely to kill you than help you. When standards of medical care were abysmally low. No, I'm sorry, homie, but there's something abnormal about you. And men have always been willing to fight to the death over a point of honor in a duel and all these other things. And you see that perennial side of human nature again and again. Do 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 do. All right, so anyway, somebody's bringing this back to Buddhism. Cruelty-free cosplay says, quote, the most basic tenet of Buddhism, life is suffering. Everyone has to start from this self-evident truth and build from there. Well, I do like that catchphrase from Buddhism. The original Pali is more like all this is suffering rather than actually saying life is suffering. But I think the philosophical point we want to make is instead to live is to suffer, right? Typing that out for you, which is not, I'm just saying this is not really the Buddhist tenet. And implicit in that formulation is the idea that if you do a lot of living, you're going to do a lot of suffering. Like more living is more suffering. And maybe if you're living less, like the example of the blind and deaf man or something, or if you're just someone who stays indoors and plays video games, you're maybe kind of doing less living, but you're also doing less suffering. And maybe also when you talk about having aspirations, having ambitions that bring you far afield, so on and so forth. So Nacho, you asked us in the other live stream, but you seem to be missing a very basic point. So I'm not going to digress into this, but Nacho asks, appropriately enough, her name is Nacho Business, because it's not your business. Nacho asks, quote, I hate to be nitpicky, but you've recently said that you would consider working at a liquor store immoral. So how do you justify a job? So I don't. So you're missing the point. I am not saying that working at McDonald's would be moral. I'm saying it'd be immoral. It's exactly an example of something evil and terrible one might have to do to survive. I'm not. It's the opposite of justifying. I'm saying here's something terrible I might have to do. So I don't know how you're missing the point of that. No, and morally, if I could do anything else, I'd do something else instead. Sure. But no, I think it's totally immoral to work at a liquor store. I think it's totally immoral to kill animals for money. But, people do terrible things. Sometimes they do terrible things for terrible reasons. And so, no, I'm really directly saying, look, guys, I may be in a situation where I have to do something very immoral and unpleasant. And so thus I use these kinds of examples. That's all. I was just grounding this in that autobiographical reality for a moment. Okay, so I said openly at the start of the video. Oh, sorry, a lot of other interesting avenues to take this conversation down coming up in the chat. I think the main advantage I have over my fellow vegans, especially people in this generation, 2021, is just that I'm very good at talking about politics as politics. Like in this life, you have to kind of say to people, look, what's political, let's talk about politically, and what's not political, let's recognize as not political and talk about not politically. Like sometimes we are talking about the laws of physics or something. Sometimes we are talking about nature or evolution as such. Sometimes we're talking about the sciences or things that are merely factual and are outside of the sphere of politics. However, yes, I do think in general that politics is the queen of the sciences, and that when you really understand politics, there's a sense in which you understand everything. And when you don't understand politics, it's really impossible for you to articulate or reason through practically anything of social importance, to be sure. Now, what is it that some vegans are saying when they make the claim that human beings ought to impose their own morality on bears, on sharks, on alligators, on lions? And they take the further step of saying that human beings should impose their morality on these other animals, even if that entails human beings exterminating all of those animals so that they cease to exist on planet Earth, so that the food chain is changed forever, so that ecology as we know it is changed forever by hunting these animals to extinction. So ironically, they're endorsing hunting animals in the name of veganism, which, again, this is part of why most people just react to this as self-evidently absurd. But as the question wrote in said, there are other people who are trying to make it seem plausible by, instead of talking about killing the animals, talking about using some advanced biotechnology to make this dream a reality. So I have talked about this on the YouTube channel before, but maybe it's good to have one video that really just pins this down and speaks about it directly and precisely. Okay, what you are talking about doing is policing. It's not a scientific concept. It's not a natural concept. It's not a cosmological concept. It's a political concept. Okay, what is policing? At its most basic, policing is imposing the will of one person on another, imposing the will of one person on millions of people, or quite possibly imposing the will of millions of people on a small minority of people. Let's say you live in a democracy and there is a referendum, and the majority of people decide that they are going to make it illegal for Muslim women to wear headscarves. Maybe the same majority of people vote in a referendum and they make it illegal to carry out female circumcision, for example. They may carry out a whole series of repressive measures that primarily or exclusively impact the Muslim minority living in that culture. So what is policing? Policing is the will of these millions of people being imposed on some number of thousands of people. I don't know, in our hypothetical, but I'm just saying it's a large number of people. They voted on this. It's their will. It's being enforced on a small number of people. Now, conversely, you could have a kingdom where just one person, the king, let's say he decides, the king wakes up one day and decides, you know what? A lot of people when they're young get tattoos that they never think through properly. 10 years later, they regret it in life. This is a big social problem. And the king says, you know what? From now on, you cannot get a tattoo until you're 30 years old. It's illegal to give anyone a tattoo when they're a teenager in their 20s. Only when you're 30 years old can you get a tattoo. One man decided this. He wrote this law, and then everyone's got to live with it. How is the will of the king enforced on millions of people? Policing. Right? This is at its most basic, at its most fundamental, what policing is and means. Right? So whether it is one king or a council of people, like a parliament, like a senate, small number of people making the law, or you have a referendum and 70% of the population, many millions of people, vote on this or whatever. Regardless, some number of people decide that human morality is going to be imposed on animals. That's policing. Right now, already we have what's hinted at here, a kind of error in categorical thinking. So I'm getting a lot of comments. So I don't think I'm going to forget where I'm at here. So I'm going to return to this issue of fundamentally what is policing. Well, pick it up from. I do want to read your comments, guys. I'm trying to sort of make a note. Cruelty-free cosplay says, quote, Vegan Gaines' argument would fit in perfectly with every rancher who wants to see every wolf poisoned and hunted to extinction, basically to exterminate wolves. How dare they kill and eat my helpless cows on my helpless farm? Yeah. Michael Harvey says, quote, vegans are generally hyper-political and have a reputation for being annoyingly radical, probably because of that link. So, Michael, I disagree. I think the problem with veganism precisely is that they don't regard what is political as political. So to give you an example, one of the most common arguments made for veganism is that it's natural. No, it's not. It's ridiculous. They will make the argument that we are evolved to be vegan, or specifically that we're evolved to be frugivores, fruitarian, and then that it's a kind of crime against nature for you to eat meat. It's completely ridiculous. Now, I understand why it's gratifying. No. This is an ethical decision. This is a social and political movement. And it has as much or as little justification as any other social or political movement. Now, I would say, just disclose my bias, I like Black people and I like gay people. I'm pro-Black and I'm pro-gay. I have never once made an argument like in favor of Black rights or gay rights on the argument that they are natural or it's due to evolution. Like we're evolved to embrace gay people and treat them well and give them equal rights, or, that people of different, that's ridiculous to me. This is political. I mean, this is real politics. Like, let's face up to it. And around the world and throughout history, most societies have been intolerant to most people most of the time. The most trivial of differences imaginable have brought about unspeakable intolerance. Catholic versus Protestant. Anyone today can say, what the fuck? What's the difference between Catholic and Protestant? Are you kidding me? Portuguese against Spanish. Do you have any idea how hard the Portuguese fought against the Spanish, in innumerable wars and so on? Well, the difference meant a lot to them at the time. They were willing to fight and die for that difference. Now, again, from the perspective today of someone from Japan or China, they'd say, look, what's the difference between Spain and Portugal? Why do you have why do you have these wars? Oh, well, what's the difference between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, guys? From a Chinese perspective or a Japanese, they were willing to fight and die for it. So no, my point is, I think that veganism would be less radical if it were more political, if it were more overtly, self-consciously, like cognitively political, as opposed to suppressing these political issues and trying to treat them as like cosmological facts, as if they're part of the makeup of human nature or nature with a capital N, meaning the world as it was created. Or of course, there are also religious delusions, believing that veganism is the will of God, this sort of thing. Yeah, I guess you'd have to say for most of human history, the two most popular ways to try to make politics unquestionable, to make political authority, decisions made by political authorities unquestionable, is either to hide behind the mask of religion or to hide behind the mask of science. As I write about in my book, currently in the 21st century, we see this other very strange delusion about the law itself, that things can't be questioned just because they're a law or just because they're in a constitution, as if that's something different than just a decision made by one person at one time that was written down on a piece of paper. There are many pages written about that in my book. But, this strange pattern of thought we have that things become unquestionable when they're called science, when they're called religion. And the reason why we don't want to admit that it's political is that whatever is political is questionable. Any decision we make. I mean, we can have a referendum and people decide to make abortion completely illegal. And then 10 years later, you have another referendum and they decide to make abortion completely legal. Actually, probably one of the best examples of that would be countries that have flip-flopped on the legalization of prostitution. Very often, people have the idealistic notion that they can completely legalize and liberate prostitution, and then they live with the consequences for a few years. Like, oh, let's have another referendum. Let's see what percentage of people still want to live with this once prostitution is taken over a large part of the city, so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay. So the delusion that these people are indulging in is that they can and should police the wilderness, forcing these human-created values onto sharks, dolphins, so on and so forth, even if it means obliterating the entire food chain, destroying ecology as we know it, in the name of this ideal that seems to matter more than nature itself or what have you. Now, I've been kind of hinting at this repeatedly in this video. What is the point of policing? To use Nacho's favorite word, what is the justification for policing? I don't normally talk in terms of justifying things. I think it's very misleading in English, what we do and don't mean by justify or saying something is justified. To give an example, if you have an atheist majority in a country, modern atheist democratic majority, and they are getting into policing the morality of the Muslim minority in the country. So this is happening right now in many countries in Europe, different places around the world, happening in some parts of China, although without the democracy, unfortunately, with only the Chinese idea of democracy. Okay, what is the justification? Anyone can argue back, and both left-wing and right-wing people argue against this. There are right-wing libertarians and there are left-wing bleeding hearts and so on who say, well, these people have their own culture. Why don't you just let them do it their own way? You know, they have their own marriage customs, they have their own ceremonies, they have their own music, they have their own costume, their own style of dress. Why, you know, if they want to cut off part of their dick in this ceremony called circumcision, why don't you just let them do things their way? Why don't you just pretend that our laws can't and shouldn't apply to them? Let them carry on, you know, in their own way. Now, this question is normally asked insincerely, and it's normally answered insincerely, but I want to answer it really sincerely. I want to talk about what is the point of policing, okay? The justification for sober people policing drug addicts is entirely based on a claim about their human potential, okay? The reason why I don't want you to become a heroin addict is because I have a definite notion of who it is you could be and should be, right? Now, most of you, today with Facebook, you could really look this up. Think back to the classroom full of people you graduated high school with, right? How many of them are dead today? I'm assuming I have a middle-aged audience. Some of you are watching this and you're 18. And you're like, hey, what are you talking about? I just graduated 2 weeks ago. It's true. I do have some teenage viewers. Okay. All right. If you're over 30 years old, how many of the people you graduated from high school with are dead today? How many of them are dead due to drug use or drug overdose? And how many of them are alive but have completely ruined their lives with drug use? They've completely rotted their brains or whatever. They've frittered away. Fritter is not quite the right verb here. They have squandered their human potential with drugs and alcohol. Okay, it's not. The justification for, the reason for, the point of me policing you, whether I'm the king or the dictator, or whether we have a democracy where it's the majority of people voting in a referendum, the fundamental reason for policing is that you have the potential to be something better, to do something better, and you are going to lose that potential. It's going to be snuffed out if I allow you to become a heroin addict when you're 16 years old. You're never going to get there, okay? There is a kind of potential that a woman has that is snuffed out by allowing her to have her clitoris removed in what is called female circumcision, okay? There is a kind of human potential that is snuffed out when women are deprived of the opportunity to attend high school and university because they're part of a religion that wants them to just get married the minute they're physically old enough to do so, and that puts them into a veil and gives them this operation and deprives them of ever having an education or a career, right? And guess what, guys? None of this relies on anything as certain as science or the laws of nature or evolution. It's all political. Okay? All of it, meaning there's ultimately, in a sense, no right or wrong, right? Like from the perspective of the people of Saudi Arabia, we are guilty of a great injustice by depriving people of the freedoms, quote unquote freedoms, they want to have within their own religious and cultural tradition, right? And vice versa. We would perceive ourselves as being deprived of the freedoms we would value if we had to go and live in Saudi Arabia, right? But the justification, the point of policing ultimately is a claim made about potential. And I will make the further statement that potential, ultimately, its significance is intellectual in character. Okay. I would just say it is not your potential to smell a flower, a purely sensual experience that justifies this. It actually has to do with the growth of the human mind and understanding, ultimately, that justifies one kind of repression or another. I'm opposed to marijuana. Everyone in this audience right now, I'm just going to encourage you to quit smoking marijuana. Never smoke marijuana again. If you own marijuana right now in your apartment, flush it down the toilet. Start living a better life tomorrow morning as a result. It's my position. Number one. Some people are dying of cancer. Some people have particular symptoms, either caused by the cancer itself or by the therapy they're receiving, such as chemotherapy. They're getting chemical treatments and different kinds of invasive treatments, okay, that are horrendously painful. I have been told, and I am willing to believe, that marijuana can be used to treat the physical pain as a painkiller and has fewer negative side effects than other painkillers for some of these people who are dying of cancer. Great. Smoke marijuana every day. You're going to die 2 weeks from now. What is the point of me policing your drug habit if you are going to be dead 2 weeks from now? You see? You see how that changes? It's subtle, but it's not fucking subtle at all. It's the most obvious thing in the world. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The justification for me oppressing you, whether it's the king oppressing you or in a democracy, the majority oppressing the minority, or in a parliamentary system, an elite minority oppressing the majority, the justification ultimately has to be based on your positive potential. And guys, whether you know it or not, basically in every Western country in the world, when someone is on their deathbed, when they're only going to live for a few more weeks, or when doctors assume that, they're given unlimited quantities of all kinds of, basically of heroin and of other opiates somewhere, because nobody cares. And literally there are people who die, they don't even know it, they die a drug addict, because they've been pumped up with painkillers their last several weeks of life. And, if they did miraculously recover, they'd have to quit this drug habit because the doctors have the attitude, well, they might as well, the last few weeks in that hospital bed, might as well make it easy on them. And nobody cares. There's absolutely no political discourse about that. Palliative care, last few weeks of life, to what extent people should be robbed of the pain and sorrow and the experience of suffering, right? Okay, so we're making a claim based on your potential, your intellectual potential, your human potential. Okay. The shark has absolutely no intellectual potential above and beyond exercising its evolved natural faculties to hunt and kill and mate and lay eggs. That's it. Okay. If you relieve the shark of its duty to hunt and kill by providing it every day with an ingeniously devised vegan sandwich, you go every day out in your canoe and you feed the shark a vegan sandwich that the most brilliant scientists have designed to appease the hunger of the shark so that it no longer has to hunt. What do you think you are liberating the shark to do? Is it now going to write that novel it was working on? There is no other nature. There is no other capacity, right? There is no further horizon. There is no intellectual development possible for the shark. It can only be the best shark it can be. It cannot imitate a human being in virtue, okay? It can't cultivate anything intellectually. And indeed, I think with most predatory species, I don't know this about sharks, there are some predatory species where if you give them food this way, if human beings relieve them, they no longer have the need to hunt because they're being fed. Some of them will just become completely inert. Some of them will just become lazy. They'll do nothing. But others will hunt and kill for sport. They'll hunt and kill for fun because that's all they know how to do. That's all they enjoy. Hunting, mating, they have very, very limited intellectual capacity. So this is obviously taking the more, the less horrifying form of policing as our example, right? This is policing through deterrence or something, right? The other form of policing that's being entertained here absurdly and is now endorsed by Vegan Gains. He managed to get that vegan teacher to gradually go along with it. Right? The other form of policing is to actually exterminate them because they refuse to live up to our human standards, our human values. Okay. So my point is this, when we decide that we are going to police the Muslim faith, and by the way, there are plenty of forms of Judaism and Christianity that are just as bad. I'm not joking. In Canada, you can look at the Hutterites. You can look at a lot of the kind of extreme fundamentalist Christian cults, frankly. And you say, look, the majority has decided that we do not like the fact that your women are being raised without going to high school and university and so on. And I know it's ridiculous because it's not compulsory to go to university, but we don't like what you're doing, the way you're raising young women in this. And we are actually going to start passing laws and we're going to break up your closed cult-like community. You can imagine there are some Mormon groups that are like this too, because we really want these women to have access to education and be a part of society and all these in all these different ways. Ultimately, it's about intellectual potential. It's like, look, you are depriving these women of the life of the mind. You're depriving them of the full range of their human nature, their human capabilities. Right? That is the justification for what is genuinely oppressive. When you prevent people from circumcising their own children, you're oppressing them. You prevent people from raising their own sons and daughters the way they want to with their own culture. You're oppressing them. You're saying, yes, this oppression is justified because we really believe that you have other potential. There's a better life. There's a more meaningful life for you to live that you'd be deprived of otherwise. Okay. There is in this way no justification whatsoever for civilized human beings to engage in policing the wilderness, policing sharks, policing leopards, tigers, lions, right? And the lion has no other nature, no higher intellectual characteristics that it can exercise, develop, or ever even imagine or aspire to. So guys, I'll read your comments. From my perspective, that's a wrap. It's simple. Like, that's it. We talked about the stupidity and futility of utilitarianism. We talked about the extent to which, like, this whole line of philosophy is just a kind of categorical error, right? You're thinking about something in the wrong category and then leads to misapprehensions and misunderstandings. And we talked about the extent to which the fundamental problem is misperceiving what's political as if it were natural or scientific. So I'm done. If you guys have questions, if you guys have objections, if there's anything else you want to bring to it, let's hear it. You know what I'm saying? The other, kind of line of inquiry I opened up here was for us to ask ourselves, just how stupid are these people? I'm sorry. So I made a relatively brief video. I think it's under 10 minutes long, where I was really pointing the finger at Vegan Gains and that vegan teacher. And we could point the finger in the same way at Gary Yourofsky and many of the others. And we can really say, how stupid are these people really? And to what extent have we been kidding ourselves? To what extent have we been, in our own eyes, making them into heroes, making them into our idols, and just assuming they have some tremendous depth of understanding, intelligence, etc., just because they're charismatic or funny, or we have some reason to admire them. Maybe just we find them attractive or something. So I mean, I do feel that's ultimately the question. When these people show you how stupid they are, believe them. You know what I mean? You have to really take it seriously. You have to really take on board the full depth and gravity and implications of the fact that this person just told you that they want to kill all of the lions on planet Earth, and it wouldn't end there. You'd have to kill all the mosquitoes. Like, think about this down to the microorganisms in the ocean. You'd have to kill all of the whales eating zooplankton. This is not vegan. I don't know any creature in the ocean that would be vegan enough to satisfy this. So you would wipe out all life in the ocean. Why? For what benefit? Who, cui bono, say in Latin, who would benefit from this? You would completely devastate the world's ecology in the name of this human-created abstract ideal. Now, okay, I can give you guys another quick example. You may or may not remember this, but many years ago, I had another YouTuber on my channel. She's someone who was inspired to start her channel in the first place because of me. Her name was Mod Vegan. So Mod Vegan with no space. Mod Vegan thought that human beings should prevent bears from raping other bears in the forest. So bears, I'm generalizing, hashtag not all bears. But among bears, generally speaking, rape is common, and cannibalism is also common. Lions, too, have a great deal of cannibalism. Yeah, it's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a bear-eat-bear world also, okay? So you have an idea of human morality, and this is specifically human sexuality, and you want to impose it on bears. You want to police bears. You want to police the morality of bears, the diet of bears. You're going to bring them into court for murder. I mean, it's for some of us, it's just so self-evidently absurd. But do you have the vocabulary to reason that through? Do you have the ability to really explain to someone where it is they're going wrong in applying this concept of policing? Now, by contrast, you can take these same ideas and use them within the human sphere, and you can immediately see how meaningful and important it is, right? Why does it matter to police people to make them vegan? Everyone here has relatives. Melissa has even talked about some of her relatives. You have relatives whose lives have been destroyed by meat and dairy and eggs. You have people who've died, people who are disabled, mental as well as heart disabilities, vascular disease. It's so common. And so, the health argument alone, there's this cardiovascular kind of argument. We say, well, what do you mean? People's lives being ruined? And again, the ultimate justification of policing is human potential. It's a big difference dying at age 55 versus age 75. It's a big difference since they're probably your most intelligent years of your life. No, I want you to live. I want you to have a meaningful life. I want you to develop your intellectual faculties and do all kinds of meaningful things those 20 years instead of dying because you eat cheeseburgers or because you eat egg salad or something. Well, I don't know what people eat. There's a very clear justification there. That's the health argument, which for me ultimately is kind of trivial because I think the ethical argument is so much more important, and because I think veganism is fundamentally political anyway, right? Okay, well, this is what I'm asking you is, are we such bears? Are we such lions? Are we such sharks? Are we such alligators? Can't we do better? I want you to lead a more meaningful life that way too. And again, I could say reaching out across cultural barriers and language barriers, you could reach out, you can imagine if you're talking to a traditional Muslim family who have never really thought about veganism or vegetarianism, it's not part of their religious tradition in the same way that, like for Buddhists, they have an idea about vegetarianism, at least, about refusing to eat meat being morally significant. Well, look, I want you to feel better than this. I want you to be superior to someone who just mindlessly keeps on eating cheeseburgers because their parents and grandparents ate cheeseburgers. I want you to be the kind of person who's at the level of intellectual sophistication and detachment that you can make this judgment, decide this is the right thing to do, and then live by it and hold yourself to that higher standard. I can't say that to a literal shark. I can't say that to a literal anything. Can't say it to an ostrich either. I'm sorry. It's not just these big predators. The robin plucks an earthworm out of the ground. Hashtag not vegan. You would literally eradicate every robin, every songbird, every crow. You would kill every bird on earth because they would dare to pull a worm from the ground. They would dare to crush up a potato bug. They eat the insects out of the air and off the ground. So you want to commit genocide against robins for not living up to your standards. This is madness. And again, I've now given you guys a 1-hour lecture so you can say something more sophisticated than just saying this is madness. It's madness because you are policing them in a way that's irrelevant. It's ridiculous. And by contrast, you have to talk about what is the positive justification for policing. What is the point of policing? The point is I'm policing you because I don't want you to become a heroin addict. I don't want you to drop out of school and be unemployable and whatever. I don't want all these terrible things to happen to you. And I'm policing you in a sense also. I want you to be vegan. I want you to have this more sophisticated, morally responsible, view of life, so on and so forth. I am doing that because of your positive potential. When you scale it up, our positive potential. All right. Afghanistan could be a better country if they became, 90% atheist and 90% vegan. These things are linked in many ways. If you could bring about fundamental positive changes in their attitudes, and their level of education, and their outlook on life, and so on, you could radically, improve life for everyone in that society. Now, how are you going to do it? Obviously, we've just seen a 20-year experiment asking the question of, can you oppress the people of Afghanistan into enlightenment? And the answer is George W. Bush can't. I think some other president, frankly, could have done it. I think a lot of this has to be blamed on the unique stupidity of two men, George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Well, they didn't do it. They failed. But, left to their own devices, their culture is going to go on. They're going to go on oppressing themselves and oppressing one another and oppressing women and oppressing animals. It's going to go on and on forever. And, the point of policing in this sense, use a catcher. The point is ultimately is enlightenment, is of wanting people to live an enlightened life and make enlightened choices and become enlightened people, become better people. That's why I'm telling you to not smoke marijuana. Why I'm telling you also to not use heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, and innumerable other drugs. But when we turn to a robin, a penguin, it's meaningless There is just no sense in which we can preach to the penguins that they ought not to eat fish, or preach to the robin that it ought not to eat the earthworm. And again, so there is neither a hypothetical nor actual better world that can ensue thereafter, because ultimately these things are intellectual nature. Okay, so Melissa, if you want to say something, you can. I mean, I'd say from my perspective, that's it. It's mic drop. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to say on this. And obviously this has been explained in different terms with different examples, but I don't think my position on this has played in any way, it has changed in any way since I first made a video talking about it probably 4 years ago. I think I was talking about this in 2016. Keep it moving. Hit it.
Okay, it's not anything contrary to what you said. However, I was just thinking about the woman that we saw sitting outside of the market today that you had seen on the street a few years ago, and now she was riding around in a motor scooter.
This woman was a self-evident drug addict that we saw today, and she's someone I'd seen back when she was capable of walking normally, and with the progression of her drug addiction, she's been on these streets I think for 5 years, maybe 4 years, but I've seen her around for a few years, and she is withering away and is now going around on a government provided motor scooter.
Right. So it is not because you simply despise people for being drug addicts, but because of the heartbreaking realization that this person had the human potential that sharks don't have. And they take it for granted every day that they aren't sharks, that they could read a book, that they could write a book, but instead they're drug addicts and they ride around on a motor scooter.
Right. So I have talked about that in other videos in the past, but it's a good point. What you're getting at is the contrast between animus as the justification for legislation and positive human potential. Now, I don't like to use the word justify because it's just too vague. I prefer to say something like, what is the point of legislation, right? You can make an argument that simply you have an animus against something. Like the king has decided he doesn't like tattoos, so he's going to forbid you from having tattoos. Or the king has decided nobody can have tattoos till they're 30 years old. The things like that have happened in human history. In Japanese history, they had periods of time when in the capital city, everyone was getting tattoos. And then there was a new emperor and everyone was forbidden to get tattoos. Nobody get they swung through different periods that way. I know in Korea, there's many centuries, men had earrings that expanded the earlobe, that stretched the earlobe. And then there was a new emperor who said, no more ear piercings, I think for men or women, but I forget, maybe it was just for men. But, that they were going to eliminate ear piercings. So, I mean, sometimes, as trivial as those things are, one way of looking at the law is in terms of animus. And, we could say, well, people have an animus against Muslims wearing the headscarf. And then that's all. It's just, well, the majority doesn't like it, so they're going to eradicate it. Well, what I'm presenting here is a fundamentally different approach to the philosophy of law, or you might call it meta law, the law of law. What is my approach to meta law? No, I think the point is ultimately positive human potential. So the point isn't just that I hate drug addicts. It's not that I hate you for being a drug addict. It's not that I hate the drug. It's not that I hate marijuana or hate heroin, right? It's that I have an idea in my mind, which may be completely fictional. It may be wrong, right? This is politics. Like none of this is science, right? I have an idea in my mind that there is a better life for you if you are deprived of heroin, if you are coerced into not using heroin. Of course, that could involve putting you in jail, putting you in a rehab program. But anyway, it's illegal. You are getting arrested and your drug dealer is getting arrested. We are stopping you. We're not giving you the freedom to use heroin because I have this idea that you could be a better person without heroin. And ultimately, getting involved with the coercive eradication of religion, whether that is Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or otherwise. And sorry, I do think, we've been alluding to it. Arranged marriage is a huge one. Well, getting married at age 14 through an arranged marriage where you didn't even choose the person you were marrying. I have an idea that this snuffs out your intellectual potential. And again, it's my idea. Somebody could find some example of someone who had an arranged marriage that worked out great. Somebody who had an arranged marriage at age 14 and it was so much better for them. Well, okay, guess what? I've got this idea and I'm coercively insisting on it. We're going to make arranged marriage illegal, and a marriage below a certain age is illegal, and getting a tattoo below a certain age is illegal, because we have this idea of your positive potential. So yeah, whether we're talking about drug addiction, religion, tattoos, or any other example, this still holds. And yeah, I mean, anyway, sorry, we can give this with prescription drugs, so on and so forth. Now, I'd also say I feel that this has always been a difference between me and other vegan activism, other forms of vegan activism. The difference between myself and other vegan activists is that actually my form of veganism is based on a love of all mankind. It is actually based on a positive love for humanity. Now, the biggest contrast would be to Vegan Gains, who identifies as a misanthrope and sometimes describes himself as a sociopath and so on and so forth. He openly says that he hates people. And many vegans do. Many utilitarians do. Many antinatalists do, and so on, where they hate human nature. They hate human beings. But, what I'm saying is that this idea of veganism is part of an idea of a better life for you, even if you can't appreciate it. Because the heroin addict may not be able to appreciate how much better their life will be with sobriety. Even alcohol drinkers, people who drink alcohol and smoke marijuana just casually, they don't think they're addicts. People who smoke marijuana and drink alcohol 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they think their lives are better with it. And I'm saying, no, I'm coercively telling you your life will be better without it. Trust me. They can't trust you. That's the only life they know, or that's the only life they enjoy. There are people in every religion, whether it's Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, what have you. There are people who will say, no, this is the good life. This is what they enjoy most about life. This is the most meaningful and important thing in their life. And I'm saying, no, there's a better life for you and your children and grandchildren. And it's got to start somewhere. This is going to start 50 years from now. It's going to start 500 years from now. No, it's going to start today. And it's going to start with us making it illegal for you to cut half your dick off. We've actually got to coercively start taking steps toward progress. But yeah, that is the nature of the claim. Other people who are my opponents may not be able to see that it actually comes from a place of love, that it really is a love for all mankind. It's a love for this positive human potential, which is primarily intellectual. It's not, in my case, it's not sensual. It's not truly hedonistic. It's not really about enjoyment of life in that sense. I think it's ultimately about understanding and learning, for me, what I think is good in life.
You
go on here.
You shared stories of living in Southeast Asia where you saw dogs really smiling, really happy, enjoying, their lives, right? So in that sense, I understand you're not.
She's talking about wild dogs, feral dogs, by the way, just mentioning.
It's not that you're interested in human beings always living happily, always enjoying themselves.
Right.
It's because that humans can do something more intellectually than dogs.
Well, what's interesting though is you've actually closed the loop, because you brought us back to the first premise about utilitarianism, right? Which is that life is not about minimizing suffering, and it's not about maximizing pleasure either, right? That actually having an aspiration to be better than a mere dog, better than merely trying to minimize your suffering and maximize your enjoyment. That's what life's all about. So yeah, that's also the most fundamental difference, or part of the most fundamental difference that alienates me from that whole utilitarian train of thought. And then these other philosophies that are one way or another folding utilitarianism into the dough. All right. Yeah, so someone here remembers when I spoke to In Mendham so many years ago. I feel I won that debate, let me tell you. Yeah, he ran away.
I was actually thinking about that because of the moon argument.
Yeah, who can forget? Yeah. So that's good news from Switzerland. Do you want to give me a kiss? Says, quote, it seems that veganism is winning in Switzerland. At the university, vegan meals have now become the default in the cafeteria. It's actually cheaper than meat. It's something we always complain about as vegans, that we pay the same amount or more for the vegan option in every restaurant when it really should be cheaper, just on the basis of the cost of the ingredients. Yeah. So someone says it would be great for à-bas-le-ciel to directly talk to Vegan Gains about this topic. Let me explain to you something about boxing and debating, okay? These guys, they'll only debate people who are stupider than themselves, all right? Vegan Gains knows I'm smarter than he is, He knows it. We spoke for years. I've interviewed him. There's evidence anyone can see that he and I knew each other for years. Okay. Vegan Gains knows me. He knows I'm smarter than he is. Okay. Vegan Gains challenges everyone else to a boxing match except me. He challenges everyone else to a debate except me. Okay. It's not an accident. Okay. Vegan Gains will never take me on. All right. Never. I also have seen enough of his debates to realize, just how boring it would be for everyone, including myself, for me to interview or debate Vegan Gains. It'll just be a joke. But yeah, no, it's not a coincidence that he doesn't act. I mean, he's still rattling his cage, demanding to have a debate with a natural vegan, because yeah, he's aware a natural vegan is stupider than he is. So he can win, or at least he can feel smart, even if she wins. Because some of his views are so impossible to support. Someone asked, "What are you sipping on?" Which is a good question for me to end on. This is a vegan rehydration fluid. And I'm now assuming that I'm going to hit the end of stream button. I'm going to go over to the gym, do a whole bunch of push-ups, which you do not need a gym to do, to be honest. It's the one exercise you don't need a gym for, but I'm going to go up and do it in the gym anyway. All right, guys, great talking to you. This has not really been a two-sided argument. This has been a completely one-sided trouncing of the other side's position. But I got one letter from one supporter on Patreon asking me to speak on this, and so we did. If you want to support the channel on Patreon, your $1 a month would be appreciated. And whatever. Don't act like it's hard to find me.